Hello, students. Welcome to another lecture. Today, we are going to be reviewing the two essays for this module, which is what is the role, what is the function of arts in society. By now, you should have watched the Ai Weiwei documentary, Never Sorry. I have been reading those of you that already uploaded your notes, and I love your reflections. Really good note taking by the majority of you, so thank you and congratulations on that. If you haven't done it yet, make sure to view it and to upload your notes and a little reflection onto Canvas. I believe that the deadline is tonight. Let me confirm for you. Yeah, so yeah, tonight. All right, so I won't keep you here long because I'm really interested in getting into our next module, which is finally going to be getting into artists and institutions and history in Los Angeles. The first topic that we're going to be covering about our city is going to be ethnic museums and what is the role of ethnic museums within our communities and why do we have them to begin with. So after today's lecture, I will be opening up that module for you guys. So you're going to have one reading on called Displaying and Celebrating the Other, the role of ethnic museums in Los Angeles. So it is very focused to our city. And that's going to lead us to investigate and analyze one ethnic museum in Los Angeles, which is the Japanese American National Museum, JANM, J-A-N-M for short. And that's going to lead us to visiting that museum as a group. And I do have an in-person version of this class, so we might have an opportunity to combine the classes, but more on that later, but that's just what's coming up. So we're going to be investigating the role of ethnic museums. We're going to focus on the Japanese American National Museum, and we're going to focus on the Japanese American community here in Los Angeles. From about World War II. We will be learning a little bit about before World War II, but focusing on World War II and how this community was affected during the war and the tragic history, which JANM does a really great job at preserving. So that's what's coming up. So we're finally going to leave these themes, which is what is multiculturalism, what is the role of arts in society, and then dive into our LA history and arts and culture. So again, by now you should have watched Ai Weiwei, and what I love about that documentary is that it really brings to the forefront what the role of an artist in society is. Why are artists considered dangerous? You all saw everything that had been done to Ai Weiwei, and I want you to compare that experience, which was in a totalitarian government, with maybe the Howard Zen, you really can't see anything. Okay, the Howard Zen essay on artists in times of war, where he talks about American artists, including songwriters, novelists, poets, who have used their platform to speak out against issues that they did not agree with, things that when they were calling truth to power, where they saw an overreach of power or corruption, and how important that is for a thriving and a healthy democracy. So we are going to start off with the review of the Howard Zen, and then go into a denser essay, which is the function of artists in society, starving artists, and other myths. So as you're thinking about Ai Weiwei, and again, I know that you guys are all telling me your feelings about it and what you thought, but I want us to consider what the role of artists is here in our society. Obviously, we live in a democracy where ideas of freedom of expression, freedom of speech are hailed as cornerstones of our society. But there have been moments in history where artists stood out, they used their platform, they used their voice, and sometimes their creative voice to speak out against problematic issues, be it social justice, be it, sorry, doing a lot of things here, or wars, or what have you. So Howard Zen, and if you have your essay, please have it ready. I'll give you a moment to find it, whether it's a hard copy or digital. If for some reason you're in a situation where you can't access it, do try and take notes and then go back to review it with us. But one of the things that Howard Zinn starts off with right away, and by the way, Howard Zinn is a very important American historian. He died years ago, but his contributions to history can't be overestimated. He basically wrote an important book called The People's History of the United States, where he talks about history in its entirety, not picking here and there elements that will give a sort of narrative where other voices get silenced. And so he's just really a great historian. And this little essay, he talks about the relationship of artists during times of war. So the examples that he gives here are what the role of artist has been and should be. And so the top paragraph on the first page, Howard Zinn starts off by right away saying what he thinks the relationship between artists and society is. And he says that there's one word that he thinks about when he thinks about that relationship, and that is transcend. And so maybe you Googled this term if you haven't heard it before. By the way, when you look up terms for your readings that you don't understand, and I highly recommend this because it grows our vocabulary, it also helps us understand whatever we're reading a little bit better. But make sure that you select the definition that fits or that you think is closer to the meaning that the author is referring to. But sometimes when I look up the term transcendent, has to do with a sort of spirituality, and there is an element of that, except here, and Howard Zinn defines it, is where the artist transcends the immediate, transcends the here and now, transcends the madness of the world, transcends terrorism and war. The artist thinks, acts, performs music and writes outside the framework that society has created. So, in order to be creative, what an artist does is they bring into our life and into existence something that had never happened before, right? Something new into this world is brought into three-dimensional form from their mind into existence. And so thoughts work in that way as well. So when Howard Zinn is talking about the artist transcends the here and now, meaning that they are able to go above and beyond what is currently our lived truth or reality. Artists have the ability to think outside the box and maybe think about things not as the way that they are, but the way that they should be. I think Howard Zinn says exactly that here in this essay. So to go above and beyond mainstream, go above and beyond what we have currently. And if you think about Ai Weiwei, that's exactly the role that he was doing, using his art to bring awareness to major issues in his society, even if it meant risking his own life, his freedom. But he felt that that was the role of an artist or any patriot, really, which Howard Zinn also covers here. So in this top paragraph, he also says that the artist is telling us what the world should be like, even if it is not like that now. So the ability to be a visionary, okay, right now there are these situations happening in society, but the artist allows us to see another world is possible. And this is why artists are dangerous, going back to that original question. And this is why Ai Weiwei was such a threat to the government, right? Because the voice has more influence over people, oftentimes more so than the government themselves. So because, as even you saw towards the end with Ai Weiwei, He was no longer there. He was incarcerated, and his community and his fans and his followers went on to have that crab party and on his name, right? And then he says that there's a lot of ways for people to protest, and the fact that they carried on and did this without him actually being there shows how the artist has the ability to mobilize people, to make us think differently, and also think about this way that actors in our society have, even athletes when they speak out, musicians, right? And so this is why the powers that be sometimes try to uh, mute out certain voices, or scrutinize those that dare to say something that is out of step with the mainstream or what the government wants you to believe is true. So this front paragraph is really important because Howard Zinn is setting up his terms, and of course the idea of the artist is transcendent. He also says that the idea of the way that society categorizes us is problematic, because we think, well, as he says here, he's a historian. Someone says I could be an engineer, a lawyer, and then you feel that you really don't have a say in issues of war, discrimination, or what have you, because society locks us into a profession. And the problem with that is when you say, well, it's none of my business, I'm a nurse, none of my business, I'm an educator, whose business is it? And the documentary also asks that question. Ultimately, it's all of our responsibilities as citizens of this nation. We need to vote. We need to overthrow leaders when they become corrupt. That is what it means to live in a democracy, and that's what Howard Zinn tells us in this essay. So throughout, he talks about important wars, from the Vietnam War to the Spanish War to the war in the Philippines, to 9/11, which, by the way, here we are, 9/11, and how artists throughout all these wars have spoken out against it through their art, and they were able to appeal to the masses in a way that politicians couldn't, because Howard Zinn does remind us that at the end of the day, all governments lie. Why? To maintain power, and that's on page 2. Now, when he's talking about 9/11, and it's the third paragraph on your first page, he talks about these moments that are more compressed and intense than others. And here again, he goes into utilizing the term transcend, which is the role of the artist is to transcend conventional wisdom, again, go above and beyond conventionality, transcend the word of the establishment, transcend orthodoxy, the mainstream, the way things are. And again, never be fooled by, well, that's just the way things have always been and things don't change. Everything changes, and in life, and we have a hand in the way or the direction of our country. That is the power of living in a democracy and not a totalitarian society. But here he talks about 9/11, and at the bottom of the paragraph talks about a very influential CBS News anchor, Dan Rather, who after 9/11 was basically saying, Bush is my president. If he says stand in line, I stand in line, go to line. And basically the rhetoric at the time was, excuse me for that, and I remember that time where basically the government was saying, you're with us or without. You're either going to support this war or you're a terrorist. It was very divided. And so for an anchor to say that, according to Zinn and according to the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, this is problematic because, as Howard Zinn points out, that these are ideas, or this is something that you would expect from an anchor from a totalitarian regime, not from someone that lives in a democracy. And on the second page, Zinn says, again, think for yourself. And by the way, this is the trick to thinking or being transcendental, is to think, right? Think for yourself. And on the second page, Howard Zinn reminds us of I.F. Stone, one of the greatest journalists of the 20th century, um, who basically told his students, I'm going to tell you the number one thing, but if you really want to be a good journalist, you only have to remember two words: governments lie, not just the US government, but in general, all. Why? Because the tendency of those who hold power is to lie in order to maintain it. So Dan Rather saying this, Howard Zinn is saying, belongs more to a totalitarian state than from someone in a democracy. And then he goes on to emphasize the point to think outside the boundaries of permissible thought and dare to say things that no one else will say is what the artist does. Dares to say what no one else will say or didn't think it up yet. So again, linking it up to Ai Weiwei. Here he always also talks about Mark Twain, a very important novelist. I'm sure you've heard of him. He's as American as apple pie. He wrote Huckleberry Finn, but he also opposed the war, and he spoke out against it. And it says here, Mark Twain dared to say things that so many in the country were not saying. And of course, his patriotism was questioned. And again, he Howard Zinn reminds us these are ideas that belong to a totalitarian type of government. It belongs to the times of monarchs when we were ruled by kings and queens, but it has no place in modern democratic societies where the engine of the government is fueled by the people. It's a government for the people, by the people. And on the next page, on the top it says 4 of 9, but it's really page 3. I'm sorry if it's confusing, but I'll give you the first sentence of that page. To criticize the government is the highest act of patriotism. So I want you to consider the nuanced way that Howard Zinn talks about patriotism, which aligns more with Ai Weiwei, because even in the documentary, someone said, you know, Ai Weiwei loves this country and he puts his life on the line, basically. And so people like Dan Rather, maybe other folks that you might know or have heard, think, well, you just follow your leaders blindly. And again, we don't live in the times of kings and queens. Blind faith is not what is expected from citizens that live in a free democracy. So this is important because the Declaration of Independence says that all governments are artificial creations. And again, if there's a form of government, if there's a leader that's being corrupt that we don't like, we have the right to get them out of office. All right, not only a right, but an obligation. So throughout the essay, Howard Zinn talks about a lot of other artists. And the top, it says page 5 of 9, he shares a poem by Langston Hughes, a great African-American poet. And here in his poem called Columbia, we definitely have the power of symbolism shown. He goes on to talk about other artists during times of war. And I like that on page 6 of 9, he does at the very bottom include a Bob Dylan song, Masters of War. Again, Bob Dylan considered during the time a folklore singer that was anti-war as well. And so Howard Zinn does include the entire, all the lyrics here. And again, here on page 7 and 9, Howard Zinn reminds us that it's not only the artist, all of us could act transcendentally and be transcendent. And he says the trick is to think, right? To think for ourselves, to create our logic and our conclusions and not just blindly follow especially problematic leaders and policies. I don't want to keep this too long. Let me see. Oh my gosh, for a second I thought I wasn't recording. Oh my gosh. Okay, we're at 26. I want to keep this maybe for another 20 minutes, but I do want to go over, and I'm going to try and share with you my whiteboard, the function of arts in society. And this essay is a little more dense. It's probably one of the denser essays that we're going to have, but it's very important as we set the themes and the terminology for the semester, because it talks about 5 different types or functions of artists that we could have in society. Now, when we think about Ai Weiwei, he is what we would call a conceptual artist. Again, the idea is more important than showing some sort of talent. And so if your expectation of what an artist is someone that does masterpieces, has this amazing technical skill, and if they don't show that in their art and you say, well, then it's not art, you're missing the point. And so this is why this essay is very handy for us, because it'll help us understand all the types of artists, all the types of artists that are possible. And actually there's more than these 5, but this is just to get us to understand the different types of artists. And if we understand what they're trying to do with their art, we could appreciate it. And again, art is communicative. Our task in this class is always going to be, what is the artist trying to communicate through their art? What are they trying to tell us? And our task is to decipher that meaning, all right? So let me go ahead and, again, try and share my whiteboard here. And this essay does begin with an art school example where a girl is doing some sculptures. Some students don't understand what she's doing. They don't believe that what she is doing is art. And so this is why it behooves us to understand the different types of artists that exist in society, what their role is. And then very importantly, you guys are going to need to note is the stereotypes or the myths. Each of the functions has a positive and a negative myth. So again, there's 5 functions, 5 types of artists that are discussed in this article, and then their positive and negative myths. So let me go ahead and share one of my whiteboards here. And I really hope you could see it. I really hope that you guys could see this, what I'm sharing. And if not, maybe my words will help. But what I have here is a screen. In the middle, I have the first function that the 2 writers talk about. The authors are Van Laar and Dipavine. And we're going to start on page 53, where they start to talk about one of the first functions, which is the artist, a skilled worker. And a lot of these really help, the way that they are named really helps us to understand the type of what this artist is expected to do. So the first skilled worker, just as the title would suggest, this type of worker, and again, we're on page 53, is understood and known by their technical skill. The idea of a masterpiece, right, comes from the skilled worker. So the skilled worker, it says here, is a craftsperson, best exemplified by Western art from the Greco-Roman through medieval period. So under each of these headings, the authors give us a little bit of an art historical background, where these artists, these ideas came from, where this type of artist originated. They give us some names of some artists. They define it for us, and then they go into the positive and negative myths. So your task is going to be able to define what kind of art this person does, what are they known for, and then what's their positive and negative myth. This person is basically known as a craftsperson. The idea of mastery belongs here. Again, masterpiece. They basically have manual skill. They do a very specific, narrow job. Say a glass blower, or someone that plays a piano beautifully, or someone that paints or does these amazing sculptures. But the idea with this is that they don't come up with the idea. Usually someone else tells them what to do, what to execute, and because they're the craftsperson with the skill, they're able to make that for their clients. So they are, more than any of the other functions or types, more dependent on the patrons or who commissioned their work. And so because of that, it's usually part of a communal or societal art, right? Think about maybe when you go to churches and you see the beautiful stained glass windows, all that mastery that goes into it. All right, so the skilled worker, and again, I hope that you are able to see my screen here, um, has a positive myth. And by the way, um, as you're studying this, annotating it, there is going to be the positive and negatives are italicized, hint, hint. At the end of this module, you guys are going to have your first reflection paper, so be mindful of that. So the positive myth, basically these artists are described as something, but there's, myths or stereotypes about them. For this particular artist, their positive myth is going to be artist as virtuoso, and this is on page 54. I'm gonna put this thing out. Still figuring this out. Okay, positive one is artist as virtuoso. All right, so what is an artist as virtuoso? This is when they are idolized for their work. This is everyone thinks that what they did is so amazing. Technique itself becomes the goal. The flashier the technique, the better. Look at that detail. How does she do this? Oh my gosh. This is amazing, right? This is again where masterpieces or the idea of that came from. So artist as virtuoso is how these artists are usually seen on the positive light. However, we could pivot and there's a negative aspect to it, and that is artist as anarchist. Which is a rule breaker. And the thing is, since these artists are really dependent on commission, on society, tell them what to do. Think about Ai Weiwei, right? He has the idea, the mastermind for his artworks, but then he has a whole lab or a whole studio of people with technical skills doing what he tells them to do, and they're hired based on how good their craft is. But because of that, an artist could say, you know what, I don't want to do what society expects from me. I reject social integration. I have this great talent, but I'm not going to use it. So then they become artists as anarchists, which is a rule breaker. So as we continue, you'll see, and I'll do maybe one more, the artist as intellectual. And, I really like graphs. I'm a very visual person. So when I do notes, I always do something like this, and maybe this is a technique that could help you all with your studying. It helps me when I map things out. I know some people do their notes in very nice linear style. I always have idea maps, so I hope that this is something that works for you as well. But on page 55, we have artists as intellectual. Michelangelo, the Renaissance artists that many of you have, I'm sure, heard of, like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo. These are artists that have been considered artists as intellectual, and that's where this function or this type of artist comes from. And you think about the painters and sculptors, the humanists that originated from the Renaissance. They were known as intellectual heroes. Maybe you've heard the term Renaissance person or Renaissance man, which is someone that is interested in all aspects of knowledge and knows a lot about a lot of things. And so people like Michelangelo and Da Vinci, not only did they do art, but they were interested in science and math and the intersection of these things. And they were definitely fueled by a love and a pursuit of knowledge. And so that's where, art historically speaking, this function comes from. One of the critiques about artists as intellectual, and we could also modern artists with very abstract works, or conceptual artists with works that maybe some people wouldn't get right away. They get accused of being elite, that maybe only a few people could understand and that they are elitist. So just so you know that that is what some people have to say about them. But let's look at the positive and negative myths. Now, for intellectual, the positive myth is the artist as genius. And this is where the idea of someone like Michelangelo have the ideas that, wow, some artists are just genius. They're just so naturally gifted. That stereotype has been debunked, but it is a stereotype that's often given to this set of artists. So it says here on page 56, and again, they are italicized. It arose from the high Renaissance when values of individuality and intellectual property developed with the weakening of the guild system. So here we have artists that are just considered to be artists as intellectuals, geniuses, and just remarkable humans in that way. On the flip side, we pivot to the negative stereotype. And what is it, you guys? It is artist as naive, innocent. So make sure to use these terminologies. They could be a genius, right, is the idea, even though it's a myth, but it says here they might as well be a genius, but usually these artists are untrained. They are not working within the art world. They maybe didn't go and have a formal arts education, but they continue to create. One artist as naive innocent, some people know them as outsider artists. They still contribute. I mean, they're still very creative, but they just don't care, right, for the art world, which is the opposite of genius, or the idea that everyone, thinks of these artists so highly and they're honored in society. So naive innocent basically is in our contemporary time. We're going to study about Simon Rodea. He was the creator of the Watts Towers. Are you guys familiar with the Watts Towers? Google it, City of Watts. We're going to have a reading on him. But he's a naive artist in that he was actually considered illiterate. He was an Italian immigrant who worked every day on the Watts Towers for over 30 years, every single day. And these are massive towers hovering over the city of Watts. Now they're LA institutions, they're iconic. But he made them out of scraps, cap bottles, glass, anything that you could find. And he would walk from Watts to Long Beach following the railroad tracks and back, collecting what would eventually be his materials for his sculptures. So working outside of the art world, outside of art history, he created amazing public art here in our city of Los Angeles. So you see, guys, this is how these work. So go ahead and study the others. Artist is entrepreneur. The name says it itself. They are interested in money, fame, right? And they actually, the market is the one that's going to be the dictator of their success. They have to make art that's going to sell. Ai Weiwei could probably be a lot of these artists as social healer, especially what he did after the Sichuan earthquake, getting all of the names of the victims of the war, and then 1 year later honoring them. I mean, that must have brought so much healing to the parents, especially as the government wanted to keep everything very secretive, right? But probably the one that he and a lot of the artists we're going to be studying about on page 60 is the artist as social critic. These are artists that use art for human liberation, a tool in the struggle against injustice. It's a way to transform the world. Links up to Ai Weiwei and Howard Zinn. A lot of people, usually the people that are receiving the critique from these artists, say that's not art, that's sociology. They try to say things to basically negate any of the social commentary these artists are making. On page 63, you will find Their myths, the positive, it doesn't sound like a positive, but it is artists as social outcasts. They don't want to be part of society. They're usually part of a subculture. They're the romantics. They are on the outskirts of society looking in. They don't want to be mainstream. So they want to be outcasts, and that is something that they embrace. And then the negative role for them is artists as social parasites. This is where, and normally it's a sort of slander. It's a way to denigrate what they do and to minimize the importance of their art and their criticism. Just saying that they're what's a parasite sucking up the blood of society for their art. So let me stop sharing this. And I really hope that you guys were able to see this. All right, we are going on to 43 minutes. So I look forward to hearing what you guys have to say on your reflections. I will open your reflections tomorrow. Or as soon as I do it, I'll let you guys know. So take care, everyone. Next module is going to be on ethnic museums, focusing on JANM and the Japanese American community here in Los Angeles, focusing in Little Tokyo, and also South LA area and Leimert Park in Crenshaw. So take care, everyone. I'm glad that the heat is finally dying down, and I will see you next week.